everyone, welcome to Collapse Astrology. Welcome back to my returning viewers. My name is Hummingbird and we're going to get into Saturn in Aries today in real true Collapse Astrology style. I made one video already on the personal and interpersonal aspects of the transits, which is linked below if you want more on that. But today we're going to focus on the mundane manifestations of Saturn in Aries. And by that, I do not mean predictions. I mean what is actually happening already right now that corresponds to this major astrological transition, which is a lot. And mostly it all sucks, although the UAP aspect at least is a little bit of a breath of fresh air. So I see four major areas in the collective where this is showing up, and I'll pop them up on the screen here. And I will just say, in terms of, humanity, where we're at right now as a species, the last thing on this list is most important, and it should be first. It should be the first focus of any conversation about what's happening right now. And it sucks that I'm putting it last and censoring it, maybe needlessly, I don't know, but I also want to grow this channel, and it sucks, but you have to think about those things. So anyway, I will say more about that later, but wanted to name that up front. And so these other three, let me give a quick summary before I dive in. So over the past few months, there have been several more whistleblowers coming forward with various pieces of information regarding government programs that work with non-human intelligence. And the mainstream press is doing an incredibly good job of looking the other way from this topic, or just keeping the way they cover the stories kind of quick and neat and just like very low key, nothing to see here, move along, and kind of just hurrying the public along to the next distraction. But credible people are coming out saying some pretty wild things. And we'll get into some of this. It is not cut and dry at all, but it is not an op. I have watched some long interviews where I can read body language and facial expressions of these people, and it does not read as fake, at least to me. It does not read as some kind of a psyop. So then, of course, there has been the announcement of a book coming out about Joe Biden's inner circle covering up his cognitive decline, and B, a few days later, the announcement that he has an aggressive form of testicular cancer. So Biden is fitting smack dab into my research on historical Pluto returns, where I found 11 out of 20 instances where a country had a leader who was either mentally ill and or who died at the time of the country's Pluto return. But this is also a very Pisces into Aries thing too, especially with Biden's mental health, because there was so much delusion and denial and deceit around it for the first almost 3.5 years of his term, especially if you follow the timeline that book goes over. And after he dropped out, the Democrats really just hoped it would all go away. It would be kind of washed into the drains of history, the whole cover up and all of the people who enabled it. But Saturn is saying, nope, get real, wake up, chickens are coming home to roost, that kind of a thing. And then there are the tariffs. And I guess this is actually a bit of a prediction, because I guess shelves are not quite empty yet here in the United States, but it was just a few days after Neptune entered Aries that was Trump's Liberation Day, and it has taken some time for anything to take effect. There have been lots of companies begging him for exceptions, that kind of thing. So it's not the worst case nightmare scenario economically right now, but I do think that Saturn in Aries will bring economic contraction, which is something that Americans are not used to and will resist. Okay, so let's back up to March 30th when Neptune entered Aries, and let's talk about the Saturn-Neptune dance that is going to play out over the next about 8 months. Because Saturn's entrance into Aries is not happening on its own. We can only really understand it in the bigger context of Neptune also entering Aries, which signifies a much bigger background shift. I won't go into a lesson on the archetypes much here because I've covered that in other videos, but the basic story is that Saturn and Neptune are doing a little dance, a little back and forth chase over the very transformative Pisces-Aries threshold. So Neptune first entered Aries on March 30th. It stays there until October 22nd of this year, then dips back into Pisces, moves into Aries for good on January 26th of 2026. And then Saturn comes into early Aries May 24th, stays there, stations retrograde, heads back out on September 1st, and then finally moves fully into Aries on February 13th of 2026. Then Neptune and Saturn finally reach their actual exact conjunction on February 20th, 2026. So in some ways, it is all child's play until then, which is why I've been saying that 2025 is such a liminal year. We're only really getting a taste right now of what will really come to fruition then in early 2026. And when we're talking about these collective events, what they all have in common, why I think these 4 events in particular reflect the times, in each situation, it is about a bubble popping. So in late Pisces, and don't forget that Neptune has been hanging out in late Pisces for several years, with this energy, you cannot see what is going on. Everything is obscured, and there's lots of opportunity, both for just like honest mistakes, not seeing a situation clearly, and for bad actors to actively deceive and to get away with it. And of course, everything in between those two sides of the spectrum. The energy of Neptune and late Pisces together just makes it very, very hard to see clearly. But all that changes in Aries. So in Aries, there is exposure. Think the first sprout of a plant popping up from the dark void beneath the soil. Things come out into the light, direction becomes clear, things that were blurry or hard to identify start to solidify in Aries. And in the case of number 4 on this list, this is just horror, the pure horror of the fake country's very real intentions for ethnic cleansing. It's very real actions on that front, which, they have not ever really hidden. But Neptune at the end of Pisces has given people a real easy energy field in which to look away. And maybe they still will. But the thing coming to light is that the fake country is really determined to complete this intention. And in the rest of these events, it's a little more ambiguous. There's still a sense, I think even now as I record this video, that the big reveal hasn't happened yet. And again, I think that a real climax is more likely to come early next year. Although we also have a crazy summer ahead of us with Uranus moving into Gemini in July, so a lot more could happen this year as well. So let's start by talking about UAPs. I have been down a rabbit hole on this subject lately, and it is not simple. There is no neat, cut and dry truth. Let me say that much up front. For the purpose of this video, I'm not even going to focus on trying to explain the larger phenomenon at all. I'm just going to focus on what is actually happening, which is that at least 2 really major whistleblowers have gone public recently. And drone sightings over US military bases are still happening really regularly. Something is changing, maybe about the way the government is handling the topic, maybe the general consciousness around the topic, maybe in some even more profound way than that. So the 2 most recent whistleblowers, I'm not going to get into what they've actually said, but I recommend listening to them speak on podcasts, or even better, watching when video is available to read their facial expressions and body language. Their names are Jake Barber and Matthew Brown. Jake Barber came forward earlier in the year, a few months ago, and Matthew Brown came forward a few weeks ago. And they, as well as others in the community, say that there are other whistleblowers on the verge of coming forward. They both come from positions deep inside the enormous polymorphous bureaucracy that is the military. And you can interpret their intentions all kinds of ways, why they're coming forward at this time. But they are definitely from, what we call on this channel, the DS. They're from that underground Plutonian world, and they definitely both legit saw some shit, and they are bringing it to the surface. So I just recommend looking them up. And I'm not saying you should take them fully at their words. We should all approach everyone in UAP world with a huge amount of skepticism. There are many, many grifters out there. But that's why I say to watch them on video and feel your own body and listen for the parts that resonate as truth. Honestly, Matthew Brown seems young and kind of naive. I think he's pretty plain spoken. Jake Barber, obviously, you really can't fully trust him. He's evasive on some subjects, and he's counterintelligence, like a black ops guy, or he used to be. He's probably a sociopath of some sort, but you also can really feel his sincerity sometimes in some of the stories that he tells. So anyway, just watch if you're interested in this subject. Jake Barber on Roth Coulthardt's podcast was what pulled me down the rabbit hole. So maybe start there. I will link that below. And so instead of trying to explain the phenomenon itself, I want to show you real quick the US natal chart and its interesting Neptune placement. So this chart is showing the US natal chart on the inner circle and the current transits on the outer circle here. And I've spent a lot of time with the US natal chart, but as is the case a lot of times actually with reading charts, Neptune kind of disappeared into the background. Even though in the US natal chart it's very prominent, it's right up here at the top of the chart. But I never paid it much attention. Maybe I vaguely thought it had to do with this country's deceitful nature or something like that. But it's Neptune in Virgo right here at the top of the chart. And so you can see that we just had our Neptune opposition. Neptune now having just moved into Aries, but the exact opposition was in 2021. And that was also a year that had some major UAP breakthroughs. Pretty much since 2017, it's been kind of nonstop. But 2021 was the year that the New York Times had that story, which showed those two videos that mostly everybody's seen by now. And so not only do we have the Pisces energy active, especially in recent years, which is hazy and foggy and obscure, and that is very much the case with the UAP phenomenon, we also have Virgo, which is the sign of applied physics. Virgo has the superpower of translating the abstract into the concrete. It's very intellectual, but also very practical, and it is a systems thinker. It sees how things fit together in intricate, detailed ways. So Virgo clicks very well with things like code and language translation and also physics, which of course, if you know anything about the UAP phenomenon, an important part of it is the advanced technology that we may or may not have found or been given, or that humans may or may not have been able to reverse engineer. Things like jet-free propulsion, anti-gravity tech, free energy, directed energy weapons. Also, Neptune is very associated with both spirituality and religion. And with UAPs, there's this fascinating crossover between tech and spirituality. And there are also really interesting religious overlaps with contact experiences. So I recommend Dr. Diana Pasulka's work for more on that. And just looking at this astrology with all the action happening at the bottom of the chart, we're also talking about something related to the land, the territory that the United States considers its own. And I mean, there's just this really interesting mix of land, which relates to the IC, the bottom of the chart, getting lots of activation in the US chart right now, and sky, right? Land and sky with natal Neptune in Virgo up top. Also, the US Neptune return was in 1938, which was when nuclear fusion was first discovered. And of course, that led to the building and dropping of the nuclear bombs a few years later. And again, if you know anything about the UAP phenomenon, you know that nukes are pretty central to some parts of the story. So I just thought that was all super interesting. Make of it what you will and go dive into the rabbit hole if you're called. But I think that things are about to get even more real when it comes to the presence of non-human intelligence. I don't think any official government disclosure is coming, but I think it's more of a thing where the NHI might be disclosing itself. Okay, so moving on. Well, you guys, I really called this shit a long time ago. Here is a screenshot from the article I wrote in 2022 on Biden's astrology and my suspicion that he had dementia. I wrote, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of truths come out when Neptune enters Aries, and that is exactly what's happening. So there's a new book out called Original Sin, President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and His Disastrous Choice to Run Again. What a title. And it's by Jake Tapper from CNN and Alex Thompson from Axios, so two journalists with all kinds of access. And I actually listened to this whole thing on audiobook over the past few days, and it's like exactly what I thought. I didn't only get it right that Biden had dementia. I mean, there's no outright claim of that, but like it's very obvious from all the examples that they give that he is and has been in cognitive decline. And not only did I get that part right, I also got it right about the psychology behind it and how much groupthink there was, how everyone supported everyone else's delusions, how it would be career suicide to say something. And also Biden's narcissism, his Chiron in Leo in the 9th house, pride wound. The entire hierarchical mindset is just so messed up. The insidious way that everyone in political circles learns not to ask questions of power, even to really destructive ends. And of course, that applies to the journalists too. They come out with this now in a neatly wrapped and edited book instead of when it mattered, telling the truth. As Jon Stewart said, the news is selling you a book about news they should have told you was news a year ago for free. Yeah, so ugh to the whole thing. And then just a few days after the book's release was announced, Biden's family announced that he has stage 4 testicular cancer. And it sounds like it's a common form and there's treatment that he's undergoing, so it's not for sure that he's dying of that. But anyway, the man is sick. He's 82 years old. Who knows how orchestrated the timing was? I wouldn't be surprised if parties on all sides orchestrated it to sell the most books, like if the journalists have some kind of a backroom deal with the Bidens. But they also just may have known about the book and chosen to release the diagnosis right after to make people feel sorry for him, or maybe it is just complete coincidence. But even if it wasn't intentional, it is still very astrologically aligned. And so here is Biden's chart. If you want the full breakdown, I have an in-depth reading on Joe Biden that covers his natal chart and a lot of his biography, as well as his current transits and my astrological argument for him having some kind of slowly creeping neurodegenerative disease. The main piece of that is Uranus in the 6th house, opposing all of his Scorpio planets in the 12th. And you can see that right now, Uranus is very close to the end of that long opposition, but it's still closing out the opposition to his Venus and Sun. This is not quite finished. And it's also exactly square his Chiron in Leo at the top of the chart, this pride wound. And Biden is also about to have his Uranus return in the 6th house. So there's a lot up for him when it comes to health, both his physical health in the 6th and mental/spiritual health in the 12th. And again, this just very obvious public wound of pride with Chiron and Leo up top in his chart. So it makes sense that the public reveal of this illness is happening as that Pisces to Aries bubble pops. It's been taking shape for a long time, but there was this late Pisces cover-up and denial and delusion happening. And now that all the fog is clearing, we are seeing what was there all along. I will also link below my article on historical Pluto returns, and you can check that out. There are some pretty fascinating overlaps of themes that came through in that study. Okay, and now moving on to tariffs. So first off, regarding the economy, I feel the kind of energy that is very volatile, meaning it's hard to predict the timing of any big dramatic change with any kind of certainty. And a lot of that is because Uranus is so close to entering Gemini, but right now still kind of keeping things tightly consolidated and under control in the very, very end of Taurus. So I don't necessarily think that Saturn entering Aries will show up as a stock market crash or a huge supply chain breakdown or skyrocketing inflation. But I think there will be some empty shelves and discussions of recession and just the sense of the beginning of what economic pundits like to call pain. So Saturn is a contractive energy, and Saturn in Aries is a contraction of autonomy. And in America, we consider autonomy the freedom to buy something. So there are levels to this. There are people at the bottom of the capitalist death grind who this will affect their physical survival, their ability to literally just be in this world. And that, of course, is an Aries theme. But it will also affect people in all the classes, and all of America's classes are avid consumers. The working classes are more forced to be that way, at least to a certain extent, by the system, but the middle and upper classes in large part choose to be. And with economic contraction, with Saturn in Aries, there will be less autonomy in like what Americans feel is an essential part of their self-expression. So that will be interesting because, like with any Saturn transit, you can resist the contraction or you can accept and embrace it and work with it. And resisting makes the whole thing much more painful. But I think that mainstream America will probably really resist and struggle. We're talking about Aries, so its toxic side is anger, patriarchy, loss of control, impulsivity. There absolutely could be outbursts of gun violence with this transit, or an increase in self-deletion, as the kids say, self/family deletion, which is already happening at record high rates. And maybe things like strikes or protests or Aaron Bushnell type actions also could come through as a more fiery survival drive wakes up in people. None of this will necessarily be immediate, especially since Saturn is going back into Pisces at the end of the year. But we may, over the summer, at least see a ripple of various forms of resistance, both constructive and destructive resistance to Saturn. And in the astrology here, there's something interesting that I want to show you, and then we can see how this plays out as it plays out in real time. So this is the United States natal chart in the inner circle, Trump's chart in this middle circle, current transits in the outer circle. And unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about all the interesting overlaps here, maybe some other time. But I want us to zero in on all of this Cancer. The US has the Sun, Venus, Jupiter, and Mercury all in Cancer. And Trump has his Mercury conjunct the US, Jupiter, and Venus. And the US Mercury is conjunct his Venus-Saturn conjunction. For Trump, all the Cancer is in the 11th house, and it's in, you can see the 7th and 8th house in the Sibley chart. And Venus conjunct Jupiter in Cancer, astrologers will associate this with the abundant natural resources of the US and all the overseas support we provide to countries around the world. And on this channel, we recognize that Turtle Island is stolen land and its abundance belongs to its ancient keepers, and also that overseas support provided by the United States usually comes in the form of coups and corporate takeovers, or more subtle efforts involving Cancerian themes like nourishment and care. I mean, think of US aid in the context of this Venus conjunct Jupiter in Cancer in the 7th house, which in mundane astrology refers to allies and open enemies. So the Cancer in the US chart is complicated, but we can essentially say that it illustrates this country's abundance. And we really have to talk to Pluto and Saturn and Chiron in this wide cardinal grand cross for more on the shady ways that that abundance was acquired. But just at the core of the archetypes, Venus conjunct Jupiter in Cancer, this is a pretty abundant energy. And Trump's Cancer in the 11th house is more about his cult leader appeal. You can check out my in-depth video on his chart for more about that. So the interesting thing here, though, is that Jupiter is just about to enter Cancer, and it's about to come through and make conjunctions to all of these Cancer placements. And Jupiter generally is considered benevolent and expansive, right? So like at first glance, this looks like a transit that is good for both Trump and for America's abundance. And I don't know what to make of that, because there are about 0 serious economists predicting that these tariffs and the other actions of the Trump administration will be good for the economy, especially in the short term. You know, these Jupiter transits will start by mid-June, and even the pills who think America's actually going to reindustrialize and the tariffs will help, like even those people don't think that's going to happen overnight. So I personally have had some experiences with Jupiter transits that really sucked and that did not feel like times that things were going the way that I wanted them to. I have also talked to clients that have had that experience, and there is, of course, the square between Jupiter and Saturn, so it looks like conflicting energies, possibly between what Trump is saying, how he's expressing, where that Jupiterian megaphone is versus maybe what people are actually feeling and experiencing individually when we get to Aries. So it'll be interesting to watch this play out in real time, and whatever happens, we'll learn something about these energies and archetypes. And now moving on to our fourth topic here, the genocide. I don't have a ton more to say about it in terms of the astrological timing. Like I said before, it just seems like the shift into Aries is the full-on mask-off openness of the fake country about their genocidal intentions. The fake country broke the ceasefire on March 18th as Neptune was closing in on the Pisces-Aries threshold. And now there are quotes from people high up in the fake country government just being more open than ever about it. And of course, the fact they're just actually doing it. Like, they are starving almost 2 million people to death right now. And it is absolute horrific depravity, and I am sorry that I can't be more clear and direct with my words, because I do believe that it's urgent to name what's happening as directly as possible, as often as possible, to not forget. There are also genocides going on in other places, particularly Sudan and the Congo, and the stories there may be a bit more complicated or lesser known in the West, but it's all empire. It's empire. And the military-industrial complex, the sick motherfuckers who make money from killing people, which are the ultimate cause behind the mass death in all the different places on Earth. Sudan, I haven't yet learned very much about. The Congo, I know a little bit more from my DS studies. Patrice Lumumba is a very tragic story, and you can trace today's violent situations back to that coup in 1960. So it has always been about empire and its need to control resources, and it still is. And it's the same with the fake country. But there's a phenomenon I call deep state rising, which relates to a bunch of astrological things: the US Pluto return, Pluto in Aquarius, the discovery of Aries. Neptune's entrance into Aries is maybe a little more peripheral, but also relevant. And that is the phenomenon of the DS becoming less deep. And I think what the fake country's doing just really took this to the next level. It can't be hidden as easily by the press or spun as easily as the situations in Africa, for example. And that is really just for the sad fact of Westerners' racism. But that's part of what DS rising is, that the war machine is breaking through a threshold of consciousness that was largely held in place by propaganda and deeply embedded racism. So it just can't stay buried anymore. That's the threshold we're at. So I do think that that is why the timing of the Gaza genocide in particular has aligned so directly with these transits. First with the US Pluto return, which reached its final peak on October 11th, 2023. And now with this timing of Neptune entering Aries as they push forward openly with their plans. It's a new level, a new phase of the DS. And okay, guys, on that grim note, I'm going to finish. I really hope you liked this video, and if you watched all the way to the end, thank you so much. Please hit like and hit subscribe if you are new here, maybe even share the video if it was supportive to you. Those things really do help the channel grow. And also, guess what? I am very close to getting fully monetized here. So I'm really going to start being more consistent about content from now on. I'm going to start doing weekly live streams, probably on Sunday evenings, like astrological news reports that look at the past week and the week ahead, as well as 2 in-depth videos like this one a month. That's what I'm aiming for. I have a lot of ideas for videos. I have a lot to say about Uranus entering Gemini. I have a really interesting breakdown of the historical Pluto returns that, like I said, you can check that out on Medium if you're curious. But I want to share it here in video form too. I have ideas that are coming together about Aries, the dwarf planet discovered in 2006, who I think is related to AI and maybe NHI as well. And there's a ton that I could say about NHI UAPs actually, but I don't know when it will be time for me to breach that topic publicly. I'm still in the gathering information phase. But that kind of thing too, I feel like it'll probably like surface on the Sunday live streams. Oh, and if you didn't see, I made rising sign horoscope videos for Saturn and Aries, and they're getting very low views, but I think they're pretty awesome, to be honest. So I hope more people will check them out. They have special oracle card messages for each sign, as well as a breakdown of what it means for Saturn to be transiting whatever house you have Aries in by a whole sign house. So that playlist is also linked below. Please check them out. Thank you so much, guys. I will see you next time.